The deck shifted under my left boot before anything else moved. A breath later, the calibration rail slid sideways hard enough to peel sparks from the floor. Every Ossaran level marker still showed perfect alignment. I dropped the crate suspended from my shoulder rig and lunged across the bay. Vea Knoll stood inside the test circle with her face turned toward a wall of clean green readings. She never saw the rail coming. I caught the back of her harness and pulled. The rail passed where her chest had been, struck the ring behind her, and folded the outer frame with a sound like a ship biting down on metal. Then the alarms began. The stillpent array died in sections. White arcs crawled along the calibration floor. The inner ring twisted against its anchors, and a line of dark fractures raced through the polished black surface beneath us. I dragged Vea behind the remains of the cargo crate. "Do not move," she said. "That advice is late." Her 4 hands pressed against the deck. Ossarans were built for unstable gravity. Their bodies were broad through the torso, their knees hinged lower than ours, and narrow ridges along their spines adjusted posture before they consciously felt a change. I had watched them cross bucking transfer bridges without spilling a cup. Vea looked steady even while the room tried to tear itself apart. I was the one leaning. Not because I was afraid, because the pull had not stopped. "Something is dragging us portside," I said. "The bay is level. The bay is lying." Director Ashen Rawl heard that. He stood beyond the broken test circle in a silver pressure mantle, one hand clamped around the rail that protected the master reference column. He was older than every other Ossaran on Harrowake, and he wore age the way the Ark wore shielding, in layers. The ridges along his back had gone pale. Fine metal braces circled his lower joints. His black eyes held the flat patience of someone who had spent a lifetime explaining the same truth to younger people. "The reference is not capable of lying," he said. Another anchor tore free behind him. I pointed at it, then the room is arguing with the truth. 2 security technicians entered through the emergency lock. Ashen ordered the array isolated, the gravity not shielded, and every unregistered body removed from the bay. That last part meant me. I was 16 by Earth count and officially listed as a cargo-rigging apprentice assigned to Harrowake's commercial spine. Unofficially, I had spent the previous season doing whatever work the research crews did not want to admit they needed, moving unstable equipment, hanging sensor cages, crawling beneath decks too tight for Ossaran shoulders. I was allowed near the Continuum Foundry because cargo did not walk itself into laboratories. I was not allowed inside the test circle. Vea rose and looked from the green wall of level markers to the rail embedded in the opposite ring. "He moved before the alarm," she said. Ashen's gaze settled on me. "Why?" I felt the load change. The array had not generated a measurable deviation. My knee disagreed. One of the security technicians made a low clicking sound. Ossarans used it when something was too foolish to deserve a formal response. Ashen did not click. He studied my stance instead. My left foot was forward. My right heel was raised. I had shifted without thinking, the same way I did when a cargo sling began to wander. "Your movement may have introduced contamination," he said. I was outside the ring. "You released a suspended mass. Because your rail was trying to kill her." Vea turned sharply toward him. The rail moved first. The bay groaned again. That ended the argument. Ashen ordered us out. By the time Harrowake's emergency lock sealed the calibration chamber, the Foundry had recorded another stillpent failure. Not the first, not the 100th. The Ossarans had been trying to create a stable inertial pocket for 5 millennia. They had refined the theory through dynasties, migrations, wars, and the deaths of stars. They had changed the alloys, the field geometry, the power sources, and the mathematics used to describe them. Every version failed when the field was asked to hold around a moving mass. The master reference never moved. Everything else broke around it. I knew only the practical version. A working stillpent would let shipyards suspend massive structures without transmitting their weight into a station. It could hold collapsing tunnels open, steady hospital decks during evacuation, and turn violent gravity shelves into places where cities could be built. The Ossarans did not call it impossible. They called it incomplete. That was how old civilizations protected themselves from despair. 3 hours after the failure, I stood in a maintenance lock with my departure authorization folded inside my sleeve while Ashen assigned repair work. The only shuttle bound toward human space was scheduled to leave Harawake after the next cargo exchange. My berth was already loaded. My mother had sent a message every 4th day asking whether I had packed the blue work jacket she hated. I had packed it twice. Ashen divided the damaged bay into scientific and structural zones. I received the structural zone. You may rebuild the outer support frame, he told me. You will not alter the reference column, its anchors, or any calibration component connected to it. The outer frame failed because it was bolted to a floor that moved. The floor did not move relative to the reference. I glanced at Vea. She looked tired enough to pretend she had not heard that sentence. Then I'll hang the frame, I said. Ashen's back ridges lifted. From what? Something that is allowed to move. He refused. I built it that way anyway. Not secretly, Harawake did not have enough dark corners for that. I carried cargo suspension lines into the bay in full view of the cameras, removed the replacement braces the Ossaran technicians had delivered, and threaded the new frame through 6 free gimbals. The gimbals came from freight cradles designed for ore blocks that shifted density during transit. They looked crude beside the foundry's polished instruments. Scratched housings, manual locks, grease on the joints. They also did not pretend the ship was still. Vea arrived while I was hanging the final section. You were told to use fixed braces, she said. I was told to rebuild the outer support. With fixed braces. That part sounded more like a suggestion. She placed 2 hands on her hips and used the other 2 to inspect the suspension lines. You know Director Rahl can remove you from the Ark. My shuttle leaves soon. That is not the same as being removed. It feels similar from my side. She did not smile, but the small breathing plates along her neck loosened. That was close enough. I asked her to stand inside the hanging frame while I pushed one side. She refused. I have already been struck by enough laboratory equipment. Then push it yourself. She did. The frame drifted around her and returned slowly, not to the painted center of the floor, but to wherever the load settled. Vea stopped it with one hand. The reference column will classify this as unstable. It is unstable. That is not a recommendation. It is also not broken. The first low-power test lasted longer than any of the previous repair checks. The outer frame flexed, the gimbals moved, the level markers on the wall filled with yellow warnings. Nothing tore free. Technicians came closer. One of them placed a tool case inside the frame. Another stepped across the ring. Each new weight changed the frame's resting position by a small amount. The reference column objected to all of it. Its processors issued correction commands until Vea disabled the link. When Ashen entered, the frame was floating several centimeters away from the geometric center of the bay. You have misaligned the structure, he said. It aligned itself, I replied. To the wrong position. Vea raised a data slate. Structural stress is lower. Because the reference is disconnected. That may be why. Ashen looked at her as if she had removed a word from a sacred text. The Continuum Foundry did not worship the master reference. They would have considered worship intellectually undisciplined. They merely rebuilt every laboratory around it, taught every student its assumptions, and preserved its calibration history in a sealed archive beneath the Ark's core. A distinction without much practical difference. Ashen allowed a controlled integration test. His condition was simple. The floating frame had to obey the master reference once power rose above maintenance level. I knew it would cause trouble. I agreed because refusal would have ended the work. The reference column pulled the frame toward the painted center. At first, the gimbals absorbed the movement. Readings improved. Yellow warnings disappeared. Ashen watched without satisfaction. He did not need satisfaction from a result he considered inevitable. Then a freight crew shifted a loaded ore pallet through the cargo spine outside the bay. I felt the change in my right hip. The frame moved a finger's width. The master reference corrected it. The nearest gimbal screamed. "Cut the command link," I said. Ashen did not move. The frame snapped back toward center. A suspension line struck the ceiling track. One gimbal folded inward, and the test ring slammed against its safety stop. Vea killed the power. Silence arrived in pieces. First the field hum vanished, then the warning tones. Last came the soft ticking of hot metal. Ashen examined the failed gimbal. The component was inadequate. "It was fine until you corrected it," I said. The correction revealed its weakness. The correction created the load. He turned toward me. "You continue to treat physical sensation as evidence." "I treat equipment breaking as evidence." Vea crouched near the gimbal. Her upper hands traced the direction of the bend. "It failed opposite the correction vector," she said. Ashen's jaw tightened. That was the first time I saw uncertainty reach him. It did not soften his face. It made him more precise. He ordered another test. Over the next 2 shifts, we rebuilt the bay into something the foundry had never intended. I installed ballast sleds along the outer ring. Vea connected them to the field monitors. Maintenance crews walked controlled routes through the chamber while the frame responded around them. A technician moved a toolbox from one platform to another. The center shifted. The frame followed. A coolant tank drained. The center shifted again. Whenever the automatic system deleted the movement, stress climbed. Whenever Vea preserved it, the system calmed. The foundry computers labeled our best results contaminated. The word appeared so often that I began calling the floating frame contamination. Vea objected. "It is not a suitable name for scientific equipment. It is what your computer calls it. The computer also calls you an unlicensed variable. That is too long for a frame." She made the low, percussive sound Osirans used when surprise escaped before dignity could stop it. I laughed. After that, the name stayed. The real problem was that I could not explain what I felt. Formal field notation made sense to Vea the way rope tension made sense to me. She could look at a page of intersecting curves and know which one represented acceleration through a rotating reference. I saw a nest of marks trying very hard to hide a simple thing. When the load changed, my body adjusted before I chose to move, but unlike the Osirans, I noticed the correction, a tightness inside the knee. Pressure across the sole, the small delay between the ship pulling and my muscles answering. Vea built a test harness around my waist and shoulders. "I am not falling over for science," I told her. "You fall over for cargo frequently. That is employment." She suspended a mass behind me and shifted it along a track. I closed my eyes and raised one hand whenever I felt the center move. The field instruments confirmed most of my signals. Then she placed herself in the harness. She never raised her hand. The instruments showed the same changes. Vea's body adjusted perfectly each time. Her lower joints rotated. The ridges along her spine changed tension. Her weight moved across the deck. She remained unaware of it. "That cannot be correct," she said. "You moved." "I did not decide to." "Neither did I." "But you perceived it." "Most humans can if the shift is strong enough." She repeated the test with 3 Osiran technicians. None of them consciously detected the drift before their bodies corrected it. Vea stopped the track. For a while, she said nothing. Then she asked, "Why would our instruments not detect what our bodies erase?" Maybe the instruments were built by people who thought the erasing was the same thing as balance. She looked toward the master reference column through the laboratory glass. I knew the moment frightened her, not because it proved humans were better. It proved that competence could create blindness. The Osirans had evolved to survive shifting gravity. Their machines inherited the same habit. Vea requested access to the Foundry's unfiltered failure records. Ashen denied it. "Raw drift channels contain unresolved noise," he said. "That noise may be physiological context," she answered. "It has been examined." After automatic correction, it has been examined by minds greater than ours. I leaned against the broken gimbal rack. Did those minds have knees like mine? Ashen ignored me. Vaya did not. The question is inelegant but relevant. Ashen's gaze moved between us. The master record remains sealed until the next authorized review. When is that? After the gravity knot stabilizes. The arc shuddered under our feet. A warning line brightened above the lock. The captured gravity knot was entering an active phase earlier than predicted. Ashen looked up at the warning, then back at the floating frame. We do not have an after, Vaya said. Harrowake had been built around a wandering knot of compressed gravity that the foundry used as a natural stress source. Usually, magnetic tethers kept it centered in the research well. During an active phase, the knot pulled unevenly against everything near it. The arc could survive by releasing the knot. The foundry could not. The sealed archive, master reference chamber, and 5 millennia of apparatus surrounded the well. If Harrowake let the knot go while its field was active, the recoil would tear the central laboratory spine apart. Stillpoint had been designed to solve exactly that kind of problem. It had never worked. Ashen ordered evacuation plans. Vaya kept working. She found me in the cargo spine beside my shuttle. Its hull was small, human-made, and ugly among Oseran vessels. The dynamic stabilizer sat behind the aft service panel, a compact assembly that continuously adjusted the shuttle's thrust balance as passengers, fuel, and cargo shifted. I had already connected a test lead from it to contamination. You knew, she said. I suspected. This mechanism can update the reference path. It can follow a moving center, not at foundry scale. Not alone. I touched the folded departure authorization inside my sleeve. The berth lights above the shuttle were green, boarding clearance, cargo secured, a route home. Vaya watched my hand. I will not ask, she said. Good. We may find another stabilizer. Before the knot wakes. No. I disconnected the test lead and closed the service panel. Not yet. Back in the bay, a smaller improvised gimbal failed to track the ballast movement. It lagged, corrected too late, and spun the frame half around before the emergency catches stopped it. That failure gave us a useful answer. The system could not move from one center to another. It had to follow the center while it moved. Vaya searched old construction notes for any reference to continuous tracking. She found fragments from the first Stillpoint design: population transfer tables, water migration schedules, fuel consumption paths. Why are these attached to field equations? She asked. Ashen answered from the doorway. They are historical records from the origin habitat. Why preserve them? The first designers recorded everything. The origin habitat had not been a laboratory. It had been a migratory city drifting across a fractured gravity shelf. Its population moved between districts. Water reservoirs emptied and filled. Fuel masses changed every day. The first Stillpoint concept had been drawn for a place that never held still. Later generations moved the work into cleaner laboratories. They isolated variables. They removed population movement, then fuel changes, then structural flex. Every improvement made the experiments easier to compare. Every improvement also carried the design farther from the world that had created it. Vaya stared at the old records. The drift channels were not measurement errors, she said. Ashen's hands closed around the edge of the console. We do not know that. Then give me the raw record. No. The gravity warning shifted from amber to white. The deck rolled beneath us. My body leaned before the stabilizers answered. Vaya saw it. This time Ashen saw it too. He unlocked the archive. The unfiltered record filled the bay display in layers. Most of it meant nothing to me. Field density, anchor lag, rotational load, correction histories stretching back farther than any human nation. Vaya began separating channels. I watched the raw drift line. It moved in a looping path, never returning to the same point. Every failed experiment followed it for a while. Then the master reference forced the line flat. The failure came immediately after. Vaya explained the equations quickly. I understood perhaps half the words. I understood the shape. I pulled the ballast track data beside it. The curves matched. Not in scale, in behavior. Both traced the changing center of a system that kept rearranging itself. "The zero is moving," I said. Vea kept typing. "A zero cannot move. That is why it keeps breaking." She stopped. I dragged the earlier records across the display. The origin habitat's population schedule, water transfers, fuel burn, the raw drift curved with all of them. The stillpoint field had never been failing to reach a fixed center. It had been trying to follow a living one. "How long have you had access to this channel?" Oshin asked. Vea checked the archive timer. "Minutes." He looked at me. "State the solution precisely." I did not know how to state it precisely, so I released the lock on a suspended ballast mass. It drifted along contamination's frame. The frame changed position beneath it. I pointed to the moving joint. "That is your reference." Oshin's eyes narrowed. "The frame." "The path." Vea inhaled sharply. I continued before the thought could escape. "You keep telling the field where zero was. It needs to know where zero is becoming." The arc lurched. Across the bay, the master reference column locked itself into emergency mode. The calibration ring pulled hard toward geometric center. Metal began to howl. Oshin stared at the raw record, then at the floating frame. 5 millennia of failure sat between those two things. He did not apologize. He said, "Build it." The knot entered full activity before we were ready. Emergency doors sealed the cargo spine. Harrow-Wake's evacuation shifted hundreds of bodies toward the outer sections, moving the Ark's mass faster than our model could update. We activated the dynamic reference with the smaller gimbal assembly. For half a second, the field held. Then the center moved again. The frame followed too slowly. One gimbal locked. The inner ring tilted. Vea was thrown against a console, and the stillpoint pocket collapsed into a narrow blade of pressure that cut a groove through the deck. "Shut it down," Oshin ordered. "If we shut it down, the archive spine goes with the knot," Vea said. The locked gimbal was on the far side of the ring. I clipped my harness to the suspension track and pushed across the tilted deck. Gravity changed direction halfway there. My shoulder struck the frame. Pain spread down my arm, but the harness kept me from sliding into the pressure groove. I reached the gimbal and pulled the manual release. It would not move. The master reference was still forcing the ring toward geometric center. "Director," I shouted, "your column is fighting us." Oshin stood at its protected housing. The master standard was not just equipment. It was the line every stillpoint result had been measured against. Removing it would destroy continuity with the entire Foundry record. Another anchor cracked. Oshin placed 2 hands on the release housing. Vea saw him. Once separated, it cannot be recalibrated to the archive. "I know." He opened the housing. The column resisted. Emergency locks clamped around its base. Oshin took a cutting tool from the wall. No speech, no ceremony. He cut through the first lock. The calibration ring jumped. I pulled the gimbal release again. It moved a little. "Ballast teams," Vea called over the work channel. "Follow the routes from the floating frame tests. Do not seek geometric center. Report movement as movement." The cargo technicians responded from 3 sections of the spine. They shifted ore pallets, coolant tanks, and tool cradles along paths we had tested during the rebuild. Each movement changed the arc. Each change appeared on the raw drift display. Vea stopped deleting it. The line began to breathe. Oshin cut through the second lock. The master standard tore free of its base and swung sideways inside the housing. The ring relaxed. The gimbal release came loose in my hands. But the system still could not follow fast enough. The smaller stabilizer had reached its limit. Vea looked toward me across the tilted bay. She did not ask. I already knew. I kicked away from the frame and pulled myself through the emergency lock into the cargo spine. My shuttle sat beyond the inner barrier, berth lights flashing against the hull. The departure authorization was still inside my sleeve. I opened the aft panel. For a moment, all I could see was my mother's last message waiting in the shuttle queue. She had sent a picture of the kitchen window with rain on it. She had written that the blue jacket was probably too small now. The arc rolled. I tore the authorization in half and dropped it into the berth. Then I disconnected the dynamic stabilizer. The shuttle powered down around me. I carried the stabilizer back to the bay. It was heavier than it looked. My injured shoulder shook beneath the weight. 2 maintenance workers met me at the lock and took part of the load without speaking. We mounted it beneath contamination's central track. Nothing fit cleanly. The Oseran connectors were too wide. The human control bus rejected the foundry timing sequence. Vea rerouted the signal through the ballast monitor. A technician used a cargo clamp where a scientific fastener should have been. Ashen held the severed master standard away from the live ring, while its remaining charge bled into his mantle. The stabilizer came online. The drift path vanished. My heart stopped. Then I realized the display had rescaled. The path was everywhere. Not a line pulling away from center, a center moving through the arc. "Give it my frame data," I said. Vea did. The ring rotated. My feet shifted. "Port and down," I said. She sent the correction. The ring followed. A ballast team moved a coolant tank. The center changed. This time the field changed with it. The stillpent pocket opened across the bay. Loose tools stopped falling. The pressure groove in the deck ceased growing. The arc rolled again, harder than before, but inside the ring the movement arrived slowly, translated into a controlled turn. Ashen released the dead master standard. It drifted away from him. For the first time in 5 millennia, the reference did not remain still. The system held. The gravity knot passed through its active peak. Harrowake's central spine bent, groaned, and survived. No one cheered. Technicians returned to damaged consoles with bandaged hands, borrowed tools, and the silence of people testing a new truth. The cargo technicians kept calling out ballast positions. Vea kept her hands on the raw channel. Ashen lowered himself to the deck beside the severed standard. I sat against the stabilizer housing because my legs no longer trusted me. The stillpent ring turned around us with a deep, steady hum. Later, the foundry issued a narrow correction. Reference drift was no longer to be classified as contamination during moving mass tests. The fixed zero protocol was retired. The continuum archive remained intact, but every old result would have to be read again with the deleted channels restored. My name appeared on the moving reference protocol beside Vea's, Ashen's, and the maintenance teams who had shifted the arc's mass while the system learned to follow it. There was no seat in an assembly, no monument, no declaration that humans had surpassed anyone. Harrowake remained damaged. My shoulder required a brace. My shuttle remained dark in its berth. Ashen kept his position as director. He ended the fixed standard program and transferred calibration authority to a mixed team of physicists, riggers, and cargo technicians. On the first ordinary shift after the surge, I entered the rebuilt bay carrying a fresh suspension line. Vea stood inside contamination with her feet deliberately uneven. "You are leaning," I said. "I am measuring." Ashen stepped onto the opposite platform. His body corrected automatically, then he shifted himself back out of balance. Around us, the Oseran team copied the movement. The ring turned. My packed blue jacket rested beside the dark shuttle lock. Vea raised one hand as the center slid beneath her feet. The stillpoint hummed and followed their movement.